I just binged a new series that came up on Netflix called The Grimm Variations. And it was dropped, I think, on the 17th. Let me make sure. Yeah, the 17th. So I hadn't looked at it as one of my anime for the spring season because it didn't pop up at the beginning of April. It just dropped on the 17th. So I didn't know it was coming. I hadn't really, seen any announcements about it. So I watched it, and it's only 6 episodes, so I was able to binge the whole thing in a couple of days. And it should have been less than a couple of days. Each episode is more than half an hour, but less than an hour, around the 40 to 45 minute mark. So they're longer than a standard anime episode, but they're shorter than a standard, for example, drama episode. So, what did I think of the Grimm Variations? Well, let me give you a bit of background for it. First, this is from their Wikipedia. The Grimm Variations is a Japanese original net animation series. It's an anthology produced by Wit Studio, and it's based on the Brothers Grimm fairytales. And it was released globally on Netflix. And according to the production, in February 2020, so that's over 4 years ago, Netflix announced a collaboration of six mangaka creators. And I know the only one they mentioned here is Clamp. Clamp is a collective of women who write comics and help to produce anime. So they're famous for making Card Captor Sakura. And it said Wit Studios would be producing the anime series, and Michiko Yokote would serve as the script writer. So then this year in March, they announced the name. It'll be called the Grimm Variations. So the best thing I can compare this to is Love, Death, and Robots, which is also an anthology. So they'll drop a season of Love, Death, and Robots, like 8 episodes or 10 episodes or whatever. And as long as each episode has love or death or robots or some combination of those three, it fits in. And for the most part, they're animated. They're CG animation or other types of animation. Sometimes there are live action elements, but it's an animated anthology series focusing around love, death, robots. And I've gone back and rewatched specific episodes of Love, Death, and Robots. I've watched most of entire seasons again, going back and watching it. Because some of them are very beautiful, some of them are very moving, some of them are very impressive. The animation is very, very good. So that's the closest thing I can think of to compare this to. They can get other creators to come up with stories, taking a Brothers Grimm fairy tale and putting a spin or a twist on it, or modernizing it, or switching it up in some way. So they can, pump this out similar to Love, Death, and Robots whenever they want. Now, did it work? What did I think? Well, it took me a couple of days to binge it. And one reason for that is I kept kind of wandering away and coming back and finishing an episode. A lot of the episodes didn't hold my attention. They're only 30 to 45 minutes long, but they couldn't lock me in most of the time. So what's the problem? If you're a younger viewer, and you haven't seen something familiar that's been given a twist, or something that you grew up with, getting a new spin on it, this might be very entertaining, but I found a lot of it predictable. So let me go through the episodes in order. Now, the first episode is based off of Cinderella, and I found the twist very predictable. And once the twist happened, there's only two ways it plays out. The bad person gets some comeuppance and loses, or the bad person wins and evil triumphs. There's only one way it's going to end. And it was just kind of predictable. So I could see a lot of things coming once it was established that was what the twist was. I'm not going to spoil it here. There's also a doll in it who is strangely animate, and I don't know whether this is part of one character's madness or whether this doll is actually pulling the strings behind everything. I don't have any idea. So the voice acting is always great. This is Japan. Visually, the animation is beautiful. I can't fault any of those things, but I found it predictable, so it wasn't able to hold my attention. The second one is based on Little Red Riding Hood. Now, the first one was set in Japanese Taisho area, which is around the early 1900s, up until around World War II. And that's the setting of it. So it's not far off from Cinderella in a way. It's not medieval or anything like that. There's no castle and prince and all of that, but there is a kind of royal hierarchy that's included in it. So moving on to Little Red Riding Hood. So this is like the Matrix in some ways. When people die, they can upload their consciousness into some other reality and continue living there and become functionally immortal. Other people can enter and leave that area, I think, if they have certain privileges, but they exist in the real world, and maybe they want to experience what happens in the virtual world in the real world and enjoy it more viscerally. So this is a bit similar to Westworld in a way. And Little Red Riding Hood, what's the twist? I'm sure you can guess. The wolf tries to trick the girl, and then the woodsman helps kill the wolf, and happily ever after. But how can we put a spin on that? How can we put a twist on that? I found it a little bit predictable again. And I found the Matrix-style setting and the futuristic setting a little bit distracting. I don't know if it necessarily served the story, but I've seen similar or better executed versions of that in Love, Death, and Robots and other places. So that one didn't hold my attention either. The next one, Hansel and Gretel, had my attention. But I've seen The Promised Neverland. I've seen The Matrix. I've seen these kind of shows. So again, once, a few things happened, I found it, again, predictable. Although a bit of a WALL-E feeling, that Pixar movie. This one I thought was the best of the first three. But overall, I think the logic of it doesn't make sense. If you're raising children to exist in a certain type of world, what is the benchmark for graduation when they can proceed into that new world? And hiding that world from them doesn't really prepare them to exist in that world. So, there's great mysteries, but I think they're mysteries for the sake of mysteries and creepiness for the sake of creepiness rather than serving the logic of the story. So that one, it was the best of the first three, but I don't need to watch any of these three again. The next one, The Elves and the Shoemaker. This one, I'm not sure what the metaphor was. I'm not sure who the elves were or how they functioned in the story. The shoemaker is a novelist, and the elves are doing the novelist's work so that the novelist can publish books. But what is the message of this particular anime? And there's a character who's an older woman who seems to have some kind of Alzheimer's or something. I thought she was going to factor in some way, and she was just there to be there. Or maybe she wasn't an older woman. Maybe she was a girl who just looked old. I don't know. It just seemed to be there, but didn't serve the overall story. There's one thing where a character mentions a story the novelist was working on, where the novelist is visited by three women from his past, but that doesn't have any payoff. So no payoffs to a lot of the things. Overall, I guess it was okay, but I don't need to rewatch it. The next one, The Town Musicians of Bremen. So that is the dog, the donkey, the cat, and the rooster. And strangely, they work together to rid a town of bad guys, and they just want to travel and be a band. So in this case, it's more like a Magnificent Seven type of situation. And it doesn't really develop any of the characters except very superficially. And the action wasn't that impressive. So overall, I think it wasn't really a twist on the original. So it wasn't predictable in the sense of I knew the original and I could guess where this was going. It played out very similarly to the original, but in the original, those four animals trick the bad guys by disguising themselves and seeming to be one beast. In this one, it's just action. So right now, 5 episodes in, the Hansel and Gretel one and a little bit the Elves and the Shoemaker one were holding my attention, but the others weren't, and there's nothing so far that I found rewatchable. Now, the last one, the 6th one, The Pied Piper of Hamelin. This one had some real beauty to it, and this idea that, again, similar to Hansel and Gretel, children are being sheltered from the world outside because it's too dangerous or because there's some secret they're not ready to have revealed. There's a feeling of oppression. The Pied Piper is not, taking the children as punishment to the adults who broke their promise and didn't pay the Pied Piper, but the Pied Piper character is potentially liberating children from the oppression they have. And so the whole idea, what happens to the children after they leave? So I think The Pied Piper of Hamelin, I think, is rewatchable. There's some complexity to some of the characters. There's this, darkness underneath the community they live in that gets exposed to an extent. And then the ending has some gorgeous visuals and this freedom and this discovery. So I think The Pied Piper of Hamelin saved this season for me. That one I might rewatch. That one I think has some beautiful scenes. If that were the first episode of a series, and there's this journey where you go with the piper and you travel to other places and you solve problems, I'd watch a whole series based on this as a pilot episode. So The Pied Piper of Hamelin raises this entire season. Now, like Love, Death, and Robots, they can drop this whenever they're ready. Just have studios and manga creators come up with ideas and produce anime based on those. And this could be something that's ongoing, like Love, Death, and Robots. Just make them when you're ready, as long as there's the theme of a Brothers Grimm fairy tale underneath the story that you're telling. There's a framing device, which is how every episode opens and the final episode ends. And I thought the whole series was going to be like that. It's this beautifully animated kind of watercolor style of imagery. And the two Brothers Grimm are preparing folk tales and fairy tales they've collected, and their younger sister, Charlotte, asks them about the stories, or wants them to tell the story again, or has questions about the meaning of the story, or what happened before the story or after the story. But this is just a framing device so that these are all connected to the Brothers Grimm. It doesn't really have any payoff. It doesn't really have any ongoing arc for the girl. She has a lot of questions, and sometimes she raises them, but it's not like an Alfred Hitchcock Presents opening or a Twilight Zone opening where the narrator poses questions and then at the end of the episode the narrator answers questions and leaves you thinking about something. There's no bookend. There's no return to this where questions are raised. So overall, I think I can see the potential of this as an ongoing anthology series. And I guess I'll have to wait and see how it gets received by other people. or how many people watch it on Netflix. But I don't find it rewatchable. Except but possibly the sixth episode, The Pied Piper of Hamelin. That one, I think, establishes characters really well, establishes the community they live in really well, and is open-ended enough that you can wonder what happens next. Now, one thing it reminded me of was an anime that failed horribly called, I think it was called Peach Boy Riverside. And for some reason, they broadcast it out of order. I don't know why, because it just made it confusing to watch it if you watched it in broadcast order rather than in the actual order that it was supposed to be shown. But the concept was, it's based on the story of Momotaro, which is a Japanese folktale. So this old couple, living in the countryside, living in the forest, and they have a farm, and they are elderly, and they have no children. And one day, the mother is doing something by the river, or the father, one of them, and they find this huge peach floating down the river. So they take it out of the river and they take it home, and when they open it, there's a baby inside, and this baby is magical. This baby is powerful. This baby grows up to be a hero based on the teachings of this elderly couple who take him in as their son. And his name is Momotaro, which basically is like Peach Boy, because Taro is just a generic boy's name. So that'd be like calling him Peach Johnny or Peach Tommy. But in this anime, there are various peach people. And it raises a question that's not talked about in the anime, but a question I had myself. There's snow at the top of the mountain. It accumulates in the winter. It melts in the spring. And it goes down the mountain, and that fills the river. And then it flows out toward the ocean. Where did this peach containing the magical boy come from? Where is the tree that the peach fell from? It must be up in the mountains somewhere. Maybe there's an orchard full of trees with different kinds of fruit that have different things in them. Maybe there are other magical children that just went down other sides of the mountain and were in other rivers or something. And I thought that would be interesting to explore, because this is a peach. It must have come from a tree. So that means the tree is bearing other fruit, other peaches. Are they all similar to this one? Are there other peach boys? Are there apple boys? Are there orange boys? It's interesting. So you take an existing folk tale or fairy tale, and then you just think, how about that? Or what if this were part of the story? Or where did that come from? Or what happened next? These are the kind of twists I'm interested in. And I think, what if the hero or heroine were actually the villain? I've seen that before. I've seen that in Wicked. I've seen that in Maleficent. They've done that with 101 Dalmatians, having Cruella not be a bad guy. They did a version of that. I've seen this before. Things like Invincible, where the greatest hero on earth is actually evil, and he is a conqueror. What if the good guy were bad or the bad guy were good? I've seen this before. It's not that new, and it becomes a bit predictable. It depends how you execute the story, of course. Other versions, what if this was from, I think was, I forget the name of the show now. It's just, I'm blanking on it. But it was a show that was on TV where fairy tale characters were living on Earth and had forgotten their identities. I forgot what it was called anyway. But Little Red Riding Hood was the wolf, and her grandmother was also the wolf. Right? Those kind of twists, I think, are more interesting. But again, I've seen these kind of twists before, so for me that makes it a bit predictable. The Pied Piper of Hamelin followed the story in its own way. But there's a kind of a metaphor underneath it, and there's a message underneath it. So I think if you're interested, give it a watch. Visually, it's great. The voice acting is great. You might not find it predictable like I did. There will probably be other anthologies in this series, the Grimm Variations, if this one gets enough views. And the standout for me is the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Number 2, I might say Hansel and Gretel tied with the elves and the shoemaker, but I think the Hansel and Gretel one is a step up. But from number 1, the Pied Piper of Hamelin, to number 2, Hansel and Gretel, there's a big gap in there. It's not even a close second. But the Pied Piper of Hamelin, if that were a pilot for a new series, I'd watch this series. Anyway, that is my take on the new Netflix anime series, The Grimm Variations. It's only 6 episodes. It's easy to binge. If you like anime, if you like fairy tales, if you like love, death, and robots, give it a watch. You might like this more than I did. I didn't hate it, but I don't feel the need to watch it again, except possibly the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Thanks for watching.